Mr. Chairman, thank you, and also the ranking member for holding this hearing today. I think there's a couple of bills here, and if there is no objection, I'd like to say a few words for just a couple of minutes. The first of the two bills that I've introduced is the Good Samaritan Search and Recovery Act, which would solve a long-standing public safety issue in our national parks, forests, and public lands. My friend and colleague in the House, Congressman Joe Heck, and I introduced this legislation in response to the tragic stories of Mr. Keith Goldberg and Air Force Staff Sergeant Antonio Tucker. Both of these individuals were missing for over a year before volunteer Good Samaritan rescue teams received government authorization to begin searching. This bipartisan common sense legislation will allow for expedited access to public lands for Good Samaritan search and recovery organizations so that they may conduct searches for missing persons. I'd personally like to thank Keith Goldberg's sister, Jody, and her husband, Paul Thompson, for being here today. Also, Keith's brother, Jeff Goldberg, has also joined us, and thank them for their support and tireless work and advocacy on behalf of this piece of legislation. This family's courage and resilience is truly inspiring, and I'm grateful for the sacrifices they've made to advance this piece of legislation. Their brother Keith disappeared on January 31st, 2012. He was believed to be a victim of murder, but the police, operating on thin resources, were unable to continue the search for his body in the Las Vegas desert. His family went without closure for far too long. When new evidence pointed towards the Lake Mead Recreation Area, Mr. Goldberg's sister, Jody, reached out to a private search and rescue team to look for her brother. All that prevented the rescue team from discovering Mr. Goldberg's body was the bureaucratic red tape of the National Park Service, which refused to allow them to search the area without a permit and a $1 million insurance policy. After the family spent 6 months finding an insurer and raising the money to buy the policy, the search team found Keith Goldberg's body in 2 hours. Staff Sergeant Antonio Tucker's family suffered a similar frustrating ordeal. Staff Sergeant Tucker was stationed at Creech Air Force Base when he went missing June 23, 2012. He was believed drowned. A Good Samaritan team offered to look for Staff Sergeant Tucker, but was blocked by the Park Service, which required insurance and a special search permit. These hurdles were finally overcome about a year later. The team, possessing superior equipment to government divers, found the body within 2 days. No family should have to go through what the Goldberg and Tucker families have had to endure by waiting a year to recover a loved one. Our legislation will prevent such needless red tape from interfering in the search and recovery of lost persons. It will provide qualified and trained search and rescue groups with expedited access to Park Service land if they sign a liability waiver. It requires the Secretary of the Interior and the Secretary of Agriculture to implement a process to expedite access to federal lands for Good Samaritan search and recovery operations. And it will give the Secretary the authority to develop long-term partnerships with search and recovery organizations to help facilitate and expedite Good Samaritan missions for missing persons. The Good Samaritan Search and Recovery Act has the ability to conserve government resources, to provide families closure, and even to save lives. The House version of this bill passed the House of Representatives unanimously last year. I would also like to thank Senators Warner, Tesser, Hatch, and Chambliss for co-sponsoring my bill. I'm confident it can garner similar overwhelming support in the Senate if given the opportunity. Second bill, Mr. Chairman, before this committee is the Pinyon-Juniper Related Projects Implementation Act, and also is a bipartisan bill requested by the local government officials from Lincoln County, Nevada. The bill will amend existing law to provide local officials more flexibility to carry out conservation and land use goals such as infrastructure development, wildlife conservation, and wildlife prevention. Because nearly 85% of the land in Nevada is administered by the federal government, it presents our local and state governments with many unique challenges. In order to accommodate the needs to a Lincoln County Congress passed the Lincoln County Land Act in 2000 and the Lincoln County Conservation, Recreation, and Development Act in 2004, and it has become apparent that the current authorities of those existing laws do not serve to effectively facilitate the successful implementation of these important environmental protections and land use initiatives. To address these limitations, I introduced this bill to make minor improvements to those laws by improving the Bureau of Land Management's administration of watersheds and wildlife habitat and to enhance economic development in Lincoln County. Nevada Congressman Mark Amodei and Steve Horsford introduced nearly identical bipartisan legislation in the House as well. Given that this bill will spur economic growth, create much-needed jobs in a county faced with unemployment rate of greater than 10%, I look forward to working with the members of this committee to move this important legislation. And once again, I'd like to express my appreciation to this committee for holding this hearing. And if I may quickly conclude, I'd like to submit for the record a letter of support by Chairman Ed Higbee on behalf of the Lincoln County Board of Commissioners.